Hey there, guys. Good to be with you, and welcome from a very snowy Virginia, where things are really wet and snowy right now. And it's going to snow a lot tonight again. So to celebrate that, let's go play some NHL 94 on the Sega Genesis. So I emphasize the fact, by the way, that I'm in Virginia because a lot of people erroneously are assuming that I'm Canadian after the video that I did on the Miracle on Ice. This is sort of the current actual state of American nationalism, which is that if you're not effusive enough with your praise of America's greatness, of the United States and so on and so forth, then people will assume that you're from a foreign country. So anyway, it's been kind of a frustrating thing here for the last little while, but it's all right. It just shows me which people are not serious. Anyway, NHL 94 is nice because it has all of these little video clips and so on at the beginning, along with music that hopefully will not be a copyright claim, but you never know. Maybe that's going to end up happening to us here. This is actually my first time playing this on the Sega Genesis. I don't know or the Sega CD, I should say. So I don't know exactly what's different this time around. So once again, you cannot actually play a normal regular season game. You have to kind of choose what it is you want to do. This version, by the way, tends to be somewhat ignored in terms of people who do all sorts of like modifications and stuff like that. I see that I'm not allowed to change user records. I think it's because it told me that I can't change it at the very beginning. And then we'll just put line changes on so we can do this by hand and sort of see where we get from there.
Hi, I'm Ron Barr for EA Sports. Welcome to a sold-out Pacific Coliseum, home of the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, interesting. Pretty nice sound.
Let's take a look at tonight's matchups. GM Pat Quinn has built the Vancouver Canucks into a...
There we go. All right. Now this, of course, is part of the problem with the Sega CD. You end up with all of these loading times and so on and so forth. You have to remember the Sega CD was a 1X system. What? Why am I waiting here? What did I do? Oh, I see. I had it on demo mode. So we'll try this again.
Hi, I'm Ron.
All right, we'll go through it one more time. You will notice, so the sound is a lot better. Holy cow. But you will notice that there's no difference. In other words, the controls are the same. The graphics are exactly the same. And that's kind of common for Sega CD games. I've mentioned this before in other videos. I haven't done it yet on this channel. But on other channels, I have mentioned this before. The reason why graphics look basically the same between the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD is because even though the Sega CD does have its own video processor, if I understand right, it doesn't have the ability to process video. I guess you wouldn't say a video processor. It does have an extra sort of like processing chip in it, but it doesn't have the ability to process video outside of the Sega Genesis. And what I mean by that is that the reason why the Sega CD was basically like attached to the Sega Genesis, that was pretty bad by us, wasn't it? The reason why your Sega CD would attach to the Sega Genesis is in part because the Sega CD was required to have the Genesis to get the video signal to your TV. That's literally how it would work. And so, you know, a lot of the Genesis itself was, or the Sega CD was restricted and limited by what the Sega Genesis was capable of doing graphically. Now, there are a couple of things you can do, you know, in terms of Sega CD games. And I mean, everybody knows that there were games that took advantage of the Sega CD's graphical capabilities and so on. But by and large, most Sega CD games ended up having the same problem that this one has, which is that it's, graphically speaking, it's basically the same as the 16-bit game. Like, you wouldn't look at this game graphically and be like, oh man, I've got to play this instead of the original NHL 94. The nice thing here is really the sound. That's where you have all the advantage. Now, if you're trying to figure out like why that happened with the Sega CD, you also have to remember that back when the system came out, so back in 1992, 91's where they were putting it together in Japan, back when the Mega Drive CD and all this stuff was coming out, the world of CD-ROMs was mostly limited to, CD games in which or not CD games, I should say, CD-ROM tools in which you would basically have like an encyclopedia or something like that that would exist, on the CD. That was about it. All right, that's sort of the way that things worked in the CD-ROM field for decades and decades and decades, which is something that's a little bit, I think, unusual. I think the vast majority of people don't remember that that was the case. But for the most part, people saw CD-ROM as being, able to get you to have the storage of more information than you could otherwise. There was not really the focus at that time that there would later be on using CD-ROMs to, create like, 3D immersive game environments and to, have all sorts of like, additional processing power and all that other stuff. That stuff doesn't really come until around 95 or so. So when you're talking about the Sega CD, you're really talking about like the early era of CD-ROM. And so as a result, a lot of these games in the Sega CD wind up being basically like very, very marginally improved compared to, their Genesis counterparts. There were cases in which programming teams tried to make things different. How do you like that? I didn't even push shoot. Just sort of bumped that in off of the back of escape. All right, there we go. Anyway, so as a result, a lot of these games can be really sort of disappointing, especially if you compare like this game with the first generation of hockey games on the PlayStation, right? I mean, yeah, it's not that NHL 94 is a horrible game, but like there's really not much of a reason to want to play this absolutely on the Sega CD as opposed to the Sega Genesis version. The interesting thing is that the mods that have come out for this game are all focused on the Genesis version as opposed to being focused on, the Sega CD version. So apparently people don't really consider the Sega CD additional sound and stuff like that to really be all that important. All right, here we go. Let's get some speed over here. Tried to pass that, actually. It didn't quite work. So, for example, when you have the fighting mod for NHL 94, you see that for NHL 94 on the Genesis, right? But not for the Sega CD version. That one doesn't have this fighting mod. Now, I presume that you'd be able to stick it on. It can't be that difficult to modify the NHL 94 like CHD file or whatever, but I'm not aware of anybody that's really done any serious mods to this to try to get stuff like that changed. So anyway, it's just sort of the way it is. Most people these days really don't think much about this Sega CD version unless you're like really, really intensely into NHL 94. All right, we'll just go ahead and resume the game and see what we have coming up next. What did I do? It's kind of odd. I mean, I didn't even touch him. Anyway, so it is. There we go. Big hit. All right, let's go. Boy, they sent that one really, really reeling. All right, another 5-on-3. Well, it's been an interesting day for 5-on-3, hasn't it? Of course, naturally, I normally would have wanted to post all of this stuff much earlier, but there was a little game that I was trying to watch. There's your shorthanded goal. 5-on-3 situation, we score anyway. And I mean, of course we're going to score if they make it that easy. So one of the things we're going to do on this channel pretty soon is we're going to start messing around with some of the other NHL games. So we'll do the Super Nintendo version of this, of course. But eventually we're going to start messing around with like NHL 95, NHL 96, and we'll do a little bit of comparing. I do know that those games are faster, but the big question has always been whether those games are superior because they're faster or whether like we should view it differently. So look for that coming up here in the near future, and we'll probably do quite a few videos talking about that problem. I definitely know what people on Reddit think about this. I've read that, but bigger question is going to be sort of what we think about this after we sit down and play it seriously. I don't even know what line I chose. I chose whatever line was C. It's amazing. We get the big hit, they get called for the hooking penalty. Well, not quite. Anyway, so this channel that I have here, which has been about, I don't know, probably about 50 days old now, has already had its share of controversy thanks to my video about the Miracle on Ice. So maybe we'll stay away from more comments on United States hockey for the next little while. I am happy to see the United States win the gold medal today, although it was really, to borrow a soccer term, it really was against the run of play. Canada should have been able to put that one away. I do think that 3-on-3 at the very end, you know, in overtime, I do think that that was definitely a mistake. There was a little bit of talk. The NBC announcer, what's his name, Albert, Kenny Albert, was talking about how it had looked for a little while like it was going to be a 2-1-0 for Canada, and the thing that I think happened is they kind of like bet the farm on that, and you know, like 4 seconds later, the United States was able to bring it back up the ice and score, and that's kind of what happens with 5-on-5 hockey. I mean, it's exciting, right? You can definitely see the reasons why people have calls for, you know, well, it shouldn't be 3-on-3 hockey. It shouldn't be 3-on-3, right? You know, you should have 5-on-5 in overtime, and I don't know if you'll see any changes or not, though. I mean, as much fun as it is for people to watch, it's got to be really, really rough if you got two evenly matched teams and you got to play 5-on-5 for like period after period. You know, I mean, like there are sickos out there who want to see it, but by and large, when you're talking about sporting events at like the highest level, we want to see their like a result, you know, like some sort of result, some way to put to you know, take the teams apart and so on. Anyways, I said though in the Miracle on Ice video, there's nothing quite like international hockey to you know, really bring out the you know, emotional and charged nationalism in the people who watch it. I mean, there's nothing quite like it in any other sport. It's really only in hockey where you get people who start to get really, really into this and who start to care fervently about, you know, how their country does, and who start to make political statements and stuff. You see some of this in soccer or football, whatever you want to call it, but not really that much, right? It's sort of a different type feel. And it's also a very different type of sport, right? The nice thing about hockey is that if you have a lead in hockey, there's a very, very good chance that you're going to be able to, or that the lead's not going to last long, the other team's going to score, because the score can happen so quickly at just about any time, especially the way that it's played today. Whereas in soccer, you still see a lot of sort of heavy defensive play. I just remember watching both the World Cup and the Euros way back. This would have been about 14 years ago. About 10 years ago or so, around 2014 or so. And seeing Spain win all the time. And of course, the way that Spain would play is they would, you know, get a lead early on and then do whatever they could just to hold on and play sort of, you know, sicko type football, you know, and you know, kind of run the timeout, you know. And thing is, as we saw, you know, today and throughout the Olympics, you don't see that happen very much in hockey. You know, there's a lot more intensity to the sport. Overall, I think that hockey is actually a much better sport, all in all. Even though I do enjoy soccer to the point where I have a soccer channel, one that talks about Football Manager a lot. Like it's an enjoyable sport to watch, sure, but it's not quite the same. It doesn't have quite that same level of intensity. The thing is that if I'm watching like soccer, you know, I can do something else at the same time. Same thing is true of like baseball, you know, American football, Canadian football, whatever you want to watch. Right, I can always do something else at the same time. But if I'm watching hockey, I cannot. Right, and it really hurts my productivity because, you know, there's no way that I can watch that sport and like have my attention diverted somewhere else. It just doesn't work. It's not a sport that allows you to do that. Anyway. Now, the other thing you'll notice, especially if you go onto Twitter, which everybody knows is kind of toxic, but if you go onto Twitter, you'll see all sorts of people talking about, you know, oh, this was American Miracle, you know, another miracle on ice and stuff like that. Not quite. Not quite. Ever since they've allowed NHL players in, you know, it hasn't been quite the same as 1980. Now, it's a good thing, by the way, that they do allow, you know, very high-level professional players to play. We have to remember about 1980, and this is the part of my video that everybody's missing, but, you know, the truth is that the Soviet team, right, was professional, but actually the other teams also consisted of professionals. They were just all at the minor league level, right? It's not necessarily like this was a group of just nothing but college players. That's actually the United States World Cup soccer team in 1994. That was the team that was nothing but college players because there was no, you know, outdoor soccer in the United States at the highest level at that time, and the person putting together that team decided to get a bunch of college all-stars, and they did actually surprisingly well considering, you know, what the team was made up of. In fact, there was a famous game that people in the United States have forgotten about against England in 1993. It was supposed to be a precursor of the World Cup, but then England didn't make it. But there was a famous game where the United States beat England 2-0 in Massachusetts. And this was a United States team that was basically a bunch of amateurs, like a bunch of semi-pro players and college students. So anyway, but of course that's the wrong sport here for this channel. I have a video about that. Nobody's watched it on the other channel. That's just sort of the way that the cookie crumbles. So there you have it. That's the thing about YouTube, by the way, right? You know, sometimes you get a video that you made that you think is pretty good and insightful and nobody watches it. And then sometimes you have a video that everybody watches and you realize everybody's watching it because you start getting these kind of bonehead comments from different people. So it happens. You kind of have to... So you don't see as a viewer on YouTube anymore the, you know, like to dislike ratio and stuff, but you still see it if you're creating videos. And so I pay a lot of attention to sort of the like to dislike ratio and think, okay, well, I have to answer a bunch of kind of moronic questions on this one, but it looks like, you know, 90% of people watching this video actually like it, you know, so maybe it's not that bad, you know, so on and so forth. That line, by the way, was out for a long time. In theory, in this game, you're supposed to be able to push A to change lines, but I've never been able to get that to work. Let's see if we can get that to work. Well, it doesn't matter now. Oh, there we go. Oh, no, just in front of it. There we go. Man, he got totally leveled by the puck. I didn't... Trying to deke him out, I did a pretty poor job of that. Alright, let's try it again. Alright, well, it looks like we get a little bit of overtime here as well, huh? So, I mean, the only real difference between this and the Genesis version of NHL 94 is that this one has better sound, right? And even then, there's a couple of weird things like right there going on with the sound of this game. So like, you know, everything stops for a second because it's going to like a different CD track and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it's all right, but you do feel like, you know, maybe they could have done a little bit more with this. It's nothing like, you know, when we were playing the other day NHL 2004. That was a lot different. That was a completely different experience on the PlayStation 2. That was amazing. Yeah, they're going to get me on the cross check, I think. No roughing. All right, it's all good. There we go. Where's everyone? There you are. Don't just stand there. Go back. Here we go. Oh, there we go. So if I hold down the A button slightly, then I can change the line. But I think I just kept the same line on. I didn't see anybody go off. And that is, by the way, pretty cool mechanic. You know, if you watch, I've only got one video doing it, but if you watch that video of me playing APA hockey, look at the line changes in that game. That game's got a pretty complex line change system. I mean, it's cool because you can go and you can change players around and stuff like that, change it to sort of suit your needs. But this game does it really, really nice, and it's kind of automatic and it's easy to do. Right? That's the key thing. Alright, here we go. Here we go. Come on, come on. I tell you, this has been a brutal game in the neutral zone, hasn't it? Get back, get back. Boy, they've been gifting us these penalties, so you would think that we'd have something going in on one of these power plays one of these times. We haven't had any luck. Alright, let's try it again here, huh? I think I chose the wrong line there. It's alright, these guys are looking a little bit tired. I think that's the reason why we're struggling. We're about to run out of time in this overtime. Is there like a shootout because we're in regular season mode? Yeah, they've gifted us another power play. We just haven't done a very good job of converting those. Game over. No, it's just going to be a tie. Okay, there you have it. So we end up with a 2-2 draw, and that's pretty much the end of that. We can go take a look here at the game stats and see what it's like. Man, it's extremely even. About 40 shots for each team. We had double the number of power play minutes, of course, because they kept gifting that to us. We each had 18 one-timers, didn't score a single one. So it was definitely one, like I said, for the sickos. We had most of the attacking zone timing, and we just didn't get many of those shots to fall. And then the other problem, of course, is we didn't get a lot of passes to fall, but it's all right. It's sort of my uneducated style of this game. And so there you go, and we go straight back to this screen. So there you go, that's a little bit of NHL 94 on the Sega CD for you. I don't think that this game was actually worth going out and getting a Sega CD unit. In fact, I think that's part of the reason why the Sega CD did not do very well. But, you know, it's a lot of fun to go back and look at again. Like I said, there's not a whole bunch out there in terms of mods and stuff for this game. So you kind of have to stick with the original NHL 94 if you want to play this style of game. But, you know, it's still kind of fun to go back and try out again. So there you have it. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.